This bullied kid from Pretoria built a $2.5 trillion empire out of a spreadsheet he opened on a flight home from Moscow, where he had just been laughed out of the meeting. That was 2002. 24 years later, his company makes about $3.5 million an hour and launches more mass into space than the rest of the planet combined. It runs on a bet every serious engineer in the industry had priced out and rejected as arithmetically impossible. And just as he pulled off the largest stock listing in history, the market started taking it apart. Pretoria, June 1971. Elon Musk is a quiet, studious child who gets bullied for years, badly, and copes the way quiet, studious children do. He reads everything, science fiction mostly. And then at some point, the Encyclopedia. The whole Encyclopedia. This is the sort of detail biographers include to establish early genius, and which anyone who has met an actual 9-year-old recognizes as a cry for help. He gets out the moment he can. Canada, then America, then a physics degree, then Stanford, for 2 days. He looked at a doctorate in energy physics, looked at the internet, and worked out that exactly one of those was happening this decade. 1995. He and his brother start Zip2, an online city guide, which then means selling maps and listings to newspapers that do not believe in the internet, cannot pronounce the internet, and would like to know when the fax is arriving. So it's the Yellow Pages. It's the Yellow Pages that knows where you are. And who pays for that? Nobody yet. They sleep in the office and shower at the YMCA. This is the part every founder later describes as character building and never once does again. 1999. Compaq buys Zip2 for $307 million. Musk is 27 and rich. The correct move, the one almost everybody makes, is to buy a house, become an investor, and spend 40 years being introduced at parties as the guy who sold a company. It is a very good life. There is golf. Instead, he starts an online bank called X.com. A name he likes so much, he buys it back years later and staples it onto a different company. X.com becomes PayPal, and in 2002, eBay buys it. He walks away with about $180 million. 2 companies, 2 exits. He is 30 and has never failed at anything that mattered, so he goes looking for something that will. The idea starts as a publicity stunt. Put a small greenhouse on Mars, film the first plants growing in Martian soil, and remind everyone that space was supposed to be interesting. For that, he needs a rocket, and rockets are expensive. So he flies to Moscow to buy second-hand intercontinental ballistic missiles on the reasoning that they are technically rockets, technically surplus, and technically going cheap. This is a real thing a real adult did on purpose. You want to buy an intercontinental ballistic missile. 2, ideally. And what goes on top of it? A greenhouse. For that money, I would recommend a boat. He goes home without a rocket. On the plane, he opens a spreadsheet and works out what a rocket costs if you build it from raw metal instead of buying one. Metal, fuel, some electronics. A rocket is mostly a very expensive way of arranging aluminium, and the materials came to a fraction of the sticker price. And every rocket ever flown was thrown away after one flight. Imagine flying a 747 from London to New York, landing it perfectly, then craning the aircraft into a skip at the gate, and doing it again tomorrow with a new one. Aviation worked this out around 1930. The space industry had never got round to it. June of 2002. He founds Space Exploration Technologies with $100 million of his own money. The launch site is a sand island in the Marshall Islands, 2,500 miles from Hawaii. Picked because it sits near the equator and nobody lives there to complain about the noise. Falcon 1, Flight 1, 2006, it fails. Flight 2, 2007. It fails. Flight 3, the 3rd of August, 2008. The two stages collide after separation, which is the one thing two stages must never do. On an atoll in the Pacific, engineers watch it on a screen. There is no version of that footage where it gets better. You just watch it again. And 2008 is a spectacularly bad year to need money. Nobody on Earth is funding a company whose product has now exploded 3 separate times on camera in front of witnesses it invited. Tesla is also nearly out of money, and he is paying for both, which means his portfolio is 2 companies that catch fire. He had personally paid for 4 flights. 4 was the number. How many more can we build? With what? Right. There are parts for one. Then there's one. The 28th of September, 2008. 9 minutes and 31 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 1 becomes the first privately built liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit. Musk has said it since flatly. That 4th flight was the last money they had. 3 months later, NASA signs over $1.6 billion for 12 supply runs to the space station. Everyone assumed the rockets would be the thing that killed them. 18 years on, the rockets are the one part that never has. Falcon 1 was the proof. Falcon 9 was the business. 4th of June, 2010. Falcon 9 flies from Cape Canaveral. 9 engines light, and it works first time. That December, a Dragon capsule orbits twice and comes down in the Pacific, the first spacecraft a private company put in orbit and got back. May 2012. Dragon docks with the space station. A company that had been one bad Tuesday from liquidation is now doing the grocery run for astronauts. Then Musk goes back to the 747 problem. Land the booster, fly it again. Every serious person in aerospace had run this maths. Recovery means salt water, heat damage, tear down, rebuild, and refurbishment costs more than building new. This was not a hunch. It was a slide, and the slide had been presented at conferences for 30 years, and everybody nodded at it. You'll spend more refurbishing it than we spend building a new one. You've never had one back. Nobody has ever landed one. That's the same sentence. So they tried it. The early ones came down too fast. One made it to the deck and fell over. One made it to the deck, stood up straight, held for a moment like it had pulled it off, and then fell over, which is somehow worse. The landing footage became a running joke, and SpaceX kept publishing it anyway, which is what a company does when it is confident there will be a sequel. Then one stayed up. Then another. Then landing them stopped being news, which is how you know something has changed. The cost of a kilogram in orbit falls off a cliff. SpaceX ends up launching most of the mass that leaves this planet for everyone, including its competitors, including governments that would rather not and do anyway, because the alternative is not going. 30th of May 2020, Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken ride a Falcon 9 to the space station, and for the first time in 9 years, American astronauts launch from American soil. On a rocket built by a company that started as a stunt about a greenhouse. Here is where it turns into money. Cheap launch is a road, and roads make money for whoever owns what drives on them. So Musk builds the traffic himself. Starlink. Thousands of satellites on his own rockets, on his own schedule, at his own cost. Every other operator has to buy a ride, and the ride is the biggest line in the budget. SpaceX builds itself, pays itself, and keeps the difference. And every reused booster makes the next satellite cheaper than the last. It is the most boring competitive advantage in the world, and nobody else can get one. In 2025, Starlink brings in $11.4 billion, up about 50% in a year, roughly 61% of everything SpaceX earns. By the 31st of March, 10.3 million paying customers across 160 countries. Read that again with the rockets taken out. This is a broadband company that happens to own the cheapest delivery van in the solar system. Somewhere at the end of a valley, where the copper never arrived, there is a flat white panel on a roof that looks like a bathroom scale and is, functionally, part of a rocket company. The family under it pays a monthly bill and has no feelings about rockets. They wanted the internet. They got it from space because that was the cheapest way to reach them, which would have sounded insane in any other decade. Two businesses, both working, both compounding, and then, in February, he added a third. XAI, Musk's artificial intelligence company, merges into SpaceX. The combined business is valued at about $1.25 trillion. The logic holds together. AI needs computing. Computing needs power and cooling. And Musk owns a company very good at building enormous things fast. Walk me through the AI unit. Enormous long-term optionality. That isn't a number. It loses money. How much? More than it makes. So I'm buying rockets and a furnace. The most efficient vehicle ever engineered, with a furnace bolted into the boot that runs whether or not anyone is driving. 4 months later, they open the doors. The 11th of June, 2026, SpaceX sells 555 million shares at $135 and raises $75 billion. The previous record was Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil company on Earth, at $29 billion. Next day, the stock opens at 150 and closes at 161. That week, the banks take their over-allotment and the raise passes 85. On the 16th, the stock closes at $211.39. 2.64 trillion. 24 years from a spreadsheet on a plane and a man in Moscow telling him to buy a boat. That was the top. 6 weeks later, it is worth 1.4 trillion. On the 4th of August, the first earnings report lands. Revenue up 92%. AI revenue up 247%. And capital spending of $18.4 billion in a single quarter, most of it poured into AI. The stock falls to an all-time low, below the price it listed at 8 weeks before. Nothing had broken. Every rocket flew. Starlink kept adding customers. Revenue nearly doubled. The thing that repriced was the arithmetic. In 2008, he had one flight left and no money behind it. And the question was whether the engineer did, with 9 minutes and 31 seconds to spare. Everything since has been that company answering that question correctly on camera most weeks of the year. A rocket tells you it failed in about 90 seconds. You get the debris, the video, the answer, the same afternoon. A valuation can be wrong for 4 years and still look exactly like a launch. 4 years is nothing. In 1989, an entire country priced itself like it could not be wrong, and then spent 30 years finding out. That one's on screen.